I am going to hand it off to Dallas Hetherington and Kathleen Biggins of Sea Change Conversations.
Very much. Let me share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see my slide. Thank you, Andrea, very much for your kind invitation to present today to this group. We're really excited about it. And good afternoon to everyone who's here. I'm honored to be co-presenting today with Kathleen Biggins. She is my colleague. Kathleen was an advertising executive in a prior life. She lives in Princeton, New Jersey, and is the founder of Sea Change Conversations. She's also the author of this presentation and our fearless leader still today. She's going to be presenting second today, taking us to the finish line. My name is Dallas Hetherington. After my education, I spent 31 years in the chemical industry here in New Jersey before transitioning to a variety of things. And thanks to Kathleen, one of those things is to present what you're about to see today from Sea Change Conversations. Sea Change Conversations is a nonpartisan, volunteer-staffed, nonprofit organization dedicated to fostering productive conversation around the topic of climate change. We have presented this primer in 30 states and to over 10,000 people. Now, before I start, I believe we might have a poll question to kick us off. Is that the case, Andrea?
Yep, there we go. So coming into this presentation, how would you rate yourself? I would say I know a lot about the topic of climate change, some about the big ideas of climate change, not too much about climate change, or literally nothing. So you can go ahead and pick which option works best to describe your situation, and then click submit.
We'll have another one of these in 25 minutes as well, and probably one at the very end too. Okay, I'm going to go ahead while you're all finishing up your answers and begin the presentation. I have to answer my question first. There we go. And there's our data.
Okay, great. All right. I like those results. All right, Dallas, take it away.
Thank you. So whenever we hold a conversation about climate change, we think it's important to first address three facts that aren't often enough discussed, but that I think we can all agree on. The first is the fact that everyone knows that the climate has always been changing due to natural causes. We have had ice ages and crocodiles in the Arctic, but this time it's different. Scientists say that after a remarkable period of stability for the last 10,000 years, when our civilization developed and flourished, humans, through our activity, are triggering a period of instability. And we're doing it at a time when there are 7.7 billion people on our planet, with close to 10 billion projected by mid-century. And we can't just pick up our lean-tos and follow the water and food resources as they react to a change in climate. The second is the fact that fossil fuels have been great friends to us. They have given us a vibrant economy and remarkably high quality of life. But scientists say if we continue to use them in the same way that we have in the past, they will actually do the opposite, decrease our GDP and hurt our quality of life for ourselves, and especially for our kids and our grandkids. The third is that this is a tough topic to talk about. Perhaps it's been banned from your Thanksgiving table, but it hasn't always been that way. George W. Bush proposed a cap and trade approach to address climate change in his first year in office. There were multiple bipartisan bills introduced into Congress every single year of his term. In 2007, Republican congressional leader Newt Gingrich did a commercial with Nancy Pelosi supporting a cap and trade approach to address climate change. And in 2008, it was on both parties' presidential platforms. Different ways of addressing it, but agreeing that it needed to be addressed. So what happened? Scientists who were active during that period tell us that when the former Vice President Al Gore won the Nobel Peace Prize for his movie on climate change, An Inconvenient Truth, it was a watershed moment. Suddenly, something that had begrudging support across party lines became labeled as a liberal issue. And we had a new litmus test of what makes us a good liberal or a good conservative. The news media didn't help. On the far left, some claimed you had to be anti-car or anti-cow or even anti-capitalist. And on the far right, it became covered as a culture war issue instead of a scientific one. Research shows that in 2006, 50% of Fox News coverage said climate change was real. But by 2009, 90% said it was a hoax. The topic had become radioactive. Fast forward to today, the polls show that most Americans understand that climate change is happening. A strong majority understand that it's being influenced by human activities. But what Americans across the spectrum report is that they don't understand is how it's going to impact them personally and why there is such urgency to address it now. That's what this presentation is designed to help clarify. Now, we're not scientists, but we have worked very closely with scientists and energy policy experts to develop this presentation for you. It's been reviewed by climate scientists, in fact, from Rutgers, Duke, Tufts, Princeton, and Yale for scientific accuracy. We also follow a group out of Yale called the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. And they have identified 5 key questions that all Americans across the political spectrum have about climate change. And we used those 5 questions to structure today's presentation. So what are those questions? First is, how do we know it's real? The next is, how do we know it's us? What do scientists think? Is it dangerous? And is there hope? So let's dive in. First, how do we know that climate change is really happening? Well, the basic physics of how climate change works has been really well understood for over a century, and it's in fact non-controversial. Let's go over it quickly to refresh. This is the way it works. The sun's energy comes through the atmosphere, hits the planet's surface. Some solar energy is absorbed. A lot of it ricochets back off towards space at a slightly different wavelength. And some of that ricocheting energy is partially captured and re-radiated back towards Earth by greenhouse gases, which make up less than 1% of our atmosphere. These are primarily carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and water vapor. Without those gases, we would have a frozen planet. So it's good we have them. But when we create more of them by burning fossil fuels, they simply capture more energy. And they re-radiate more back to Earth, warming the planet more, adding more energy to our climate systems. Another way to look at this is in terms of the carbon dioxide cycle. That is to say, how nature stores carbon dioxide between the Earth, the oceans, and the atmosphere. Today, we are upsetting that balance that we have had for so long through burning fossil fuels. Let's consider what fossil fuels are. They're bits of plant and animal matter that died millions of years ago. They got silted over, and with time and heat and pressure, they turned into pools of carbon, what we today call fossil fuels. Humans came along and said, this is rich in energy, it's portable, I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it to heat my home, power my transportation and factories. You get the idea. And life was really good. But think about what we were unwittingly doing. We were taking carbon that nature has sequestered deep underground that had been pulled out of the cycle, this balance, over millions and millions of years, and then pumping it into the atmosphere at the alarmingly fast rate today of over 40 billion tons of carbon every single year. Much faster than the rate at which nature would be adding it. It's upsetting the balance. And at the same time that we're pumping the carbon into the atmosphere, we're cutting down trees. We're developing our wetlands. We're damaging our soils. And we're adding, because of this, even more carbon into the atmosphere, which is making it even harder for nature to reabsorb carbon to rebalance. And just a quick housekeeping note, I do hear a microphone that might be on. If you could kindly mute your mic, that'll help us as we go forward. Thank you very much. Okay, so in the US, greenhouse gases are largely from transportation and electricity generation, followed by industry, commercial and residential, and finally agriculture. So that's the breakout. So that's the science behind how greenhouse gases work. But how do we know how much is actually happening today? Well, scientists are measuring it every day around the world at over 10,000 sites, from the top of the atmosphere to the depths of the ocean. And on top of that data, they overlay satellite information. 5 agencies, including NASA and NOAA in our country, analyzed all of this data. And they all come back with the same conclusion, which is that our temperature has gone up by 1.1 degrees Celsius, or 2 degrees Fahrenheit, from pre-industrial times to today. Now that doesn't sound like a big change, but as we're going to see later in the presentation, a small change in average temperature drastically changes how we experience living on Earth. So don't be fooled by the small numbers. Small numbers matter. Scientists aren't just measuring it, they're also observing it. And we can too. Let's take a look at climate change in action with our own eyes. Take a look at this NOAA graphic showing how ice is disappearing from the Arctic Ocean. This shows the older ice, which is white, leaching out of the ocean and melting away. It's being replaced by open water and immature ice, which is depicted in dark and light blue. As you can see in this time series, which runs from 1990 to today, we are losing vast amounts of white, mature ice. This is important because the white, mature ice was very reflective. So when the solar energy came in, more of it got sent back out into space. This white ice acted like a windshield reflector, protecting the Earth, and scientists say we have lost that protective screen. Now the darker, immature ice and dark open water allow more of the sun's energy to be absorbed by the Earth, further pushing up our temperatures. And ice isn't just in the water, but it's also on land. Again, we can see climate change in action with our own eyes. Take a look at these pictures of the Muir Glacier in Alaska, taken from the exact same place, same time of year, but about 60 years apart. It looks like a totally different planet, right? We also know climate change is real because we can measure changes in our atmosphere over time. Paleoclimatologists can do this, among other things. And among other things, they can pull up ice cores that are 800,000 years old. And in those ice cores, there are little air pockets trapped by frozen snow. Those air pockets can then be analyzed for carbon levels. And what do these records tell us? They tell us that we are now in uncharted territory. We have more carbon dioxide in our air today than at any point in the last 800,000 years. Modern humans have never lived on a planet when CO2 levels were this high. Let's take a closer look at this chart. For the past 800,000 years, carbon dioxide parts per million oscillated between about 150 and 300. This was through the natural cycles the Earth goes through, from ice age to thaw. And in 1910, we broke out of that natural pattern and we crossed 300 parts per million. And according to NOAA, in January of 2021, we reached 415.5 parts per million. Scientists say if we continue on a business as usual emission scenario, we could reach almost 1,000 parts per million by the end of this century. And because we know that carbon dioxide and temperature always move in lockstep, and that carbon dioxide can last in our atmosphere for over 1,000 years, it means that all the carbon that we've been putting out now will impact future generations as far out as we can imagine. So let's move to our second question, which is, how do we know it's us? The first answer is because we understand the physics. We know we're putting carbon in the air by burning fossil fuels. And in fact, we have 43% more CO2 in the air than at pre-industrial times. And we know that adding greenhouse gases into the atmosphere will warm the planet up. So then the question becomes, how much is nature doing versus humans? Well, it turns out that CO2 molecules produced by burning fossil fuels have a different atomic fingerprint. So scientists can simply analyze these molecules to determine which ones were put into the atmosphere by human activities and which ones were put there through natural occurrences. Another way that we know it's us is that scientists cannot explain what they are observing without factoring in our influence. when they put into climate models the many things that naturally occur to influence the climate, such as the Earth's orbit, its tilt, its wobble, solar activity, reflectivity, volcanic activity, they get this blue line on this chart, which shows that we would be in a very slight cooling period right now. But when you add in our activity on top of natural occurrences, you get the bright green line. And look how closely that approximates the orange line, which is what's actually happened. So we can't explain what's going on without factoring in our influence. And given that we would be in a slight cooling period, this strongly suggests that 100% of the warming is due to human activity. Okay, let's move to question number 3. What do scientists think? This is a really important question because only about 1 out of 5 Americans understand how strong the consensus is. In fact, it's as strong as the consensus that cigarette smoking leads to increased incidence of lung cancer, something all of us on this Zoom call would probably accept. NASA says 97% or more of climate scientists say that climate change is happening and that humans are influencing it. And it's global consensus. The National Academies of Science in 80 different nations say the same thing. We also looked at the website of all these major scientific organizations, and it was unanimous. Climate change is happening. It is human influence, and it poses risks ahead. Even the major fossil fuel companies are agreeing. Exxon says the risk of climate change is real. Shell says we recognize the significance of climate change, and a key role for Shell is to find ways to provide much more energy with less carbon dioxide. And even the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, which was founded by the CEOs of the top oil companies, says that it endorses the Paris climate goals and agrees that there's urgency to address climate change. So if the CEOs of ExxonMobil, Chevron, BP, Saudi Aramco, and Shell agree that this is happening and poses an urgent threat, what are we all arguing about? Now, in a moment, I'm going to turn this over to Kathleen Biggins to take us to the end. But just before that, here's what I'm going to finish with. I want you to think about how you evaluate risk in your lives, all of you. If you're like most of us, you divide it into 3 pieces. First piece is, how likely is it to happen? Well, we just heard that 97% of climate scientists say that it is happening. And we just saw the Arctic melting away. So I think we can check the first box. Yes, we know it's happening. The second part of the risk assessment is, what are the consequences if it comes to pass? And do I want to live with the consequences? Or are the consequences something that I should avoid at all costs? The third part of the risk assessment is, how difficult or expensive is it to avoid the risk? Would you guys agree with that? Maybe yes? Then let's jump into the second part of that risk assessment, which is what the consequences of climate change could be, and are we comfortable living with them if indeed they come to pass? And this brings us to question number 4, and this is also where I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen, and Andrea is going to put up another poll question. I'll stop sharing.
All right, there we go. So poll question number 2, the urgency to address climate change immediately and without delay is number 1, low. This issue is overhyped and not something that we need to worry about. Do you agree with number 2? It's a medium urgency that people should start thinking about climate change solutions to enact in the future. Or this is 3, a high urgency, that the issue needs to be addressed now to lessen the current and future impacts. Take a moment and weigh in on our poll here. I'm not able to reopen the poll right now. My apologies to my audience member who sent me a message. Sorry.
So the current poll is open. Do you want me to end polling?
Get those last votes in. How are we looking? I think we're probably ready. Go ahead, Renee, you can close it. Okay, so I'm not surprised by those of you who self-selected to be at a webinar of this topic, that many of you agree that it is it's a high urgency and that this issue needs to be addressed now to lessen the current and future impacts. All right, and Kathleen.
Okay, well, if that many people thought that way before we started this section, it'll be intriguing to see what they think at the end of it. Because I think this section really gives us even more things to color that information and that projection. So as Dallas said, our fourth question is it dangerous? And to really focus on that, I'd ask you to spend a little time on this slide with me, because in my opinion, it's the most important slide in the entire presentation. Because for me, it represents the big picture. So on the bottom, we have time going back 20,000 years. And then on the y-axis, we have temperature from about, say, 9 degrees colder to about 11 degrees hotter in Fahrenheit. And then you see the orange line, which is the world's average global temperature. And the white are kind of milestones, just to give us reference points. So 20,000 years ago, we were in an ice age. There was a mile of ice on top of Manhattan. Much of the world was uninhabitable. And then over about 9,000 years, nature moderated and the temperature came up to what more or less has been the average global temperature for the last 10,000 years, when our civilization and our species have really flourished. And that is 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And when we hit that 60 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, which is one that the Earth hasn't been at very often in its long history, we had the emergence of agriculture and we started forming civilizations. And that little bump that you see was the medieval warming period when the Vikings were actually able to grow vegetables in Greenland. Then the divot, perhaps 1.5 degrees, was the Ice Age, when glaciers came down and caused all sorts of hardship, food deprivation, upheaval. Again, a small temperature change leading to a big change in how people were experiencing life on the planet at that time. And then the temperature goes up, up and away, forecast to land somewhere between 3.6 and 10.8 degrees Fahrenheit hotter by the end of this century, depending on what we choose to do. So let's think about that. We had 9,000 years for nature to moderate, to literally mark trees from Mexico to Montana, and to create the ecosystems and the biodiversity that have supported us for the last 10,000 years. And now, through man's activities, we are potentially triggering the same delta in 100 years. And that is frightening. And that is what pulled all of the countries of the world together to say, we can't go there. We have to keep the numbers low at the 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, which correlates to a 2 degrees Celsius that we read about in the press, or even better at a 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit increase. Because at those numbers, we think we can handle what nature may throw at us. We can adapt and we can mitigate. But above those levels, we aren't so sure. So before we drill down on what these natural systems are that are being changed by climate change, I'd like you to consider them through 3 specific lenses. And those lenses are, how will these changes impact jobs and the economy of my area? How will they impact my and my family's health and personal security? And how will it impact my exposure to geopolitical instability, which we recognize as civil conflict and refugee crises and even terrorism? Now, I'd like you to take a minute to wonder why I am asking you to think about these specific lenses. And it's because these are the 3 things that Americans report are the most important to them when they go to vote. And we believe that climate change will negatively and profoundly impact all 3. So let's see if you agree. Let's start with temperature. This graphic from NASA shows how our global average temperature has increased from pre-industrial times to today. When it is blue, it is colder than average. When it is white, it is average, yellow warmer, and red hotter. So as you can see, as we get closer to our current time, the red comes crescendoing in, and that's because we aren't just breaking records, we're really shattering them. As you can see, also indicated from this bar chart, just how aberrant our heat levels have been. And in fact, the 10 hottest years ever recorded have all been since 2005, and last year, 2020, tied with 2016 as the hottest year ever recorded. But that's looking backwards. What could be ahead? Well, Climate Central, which is a nonpartisan scientific organization, took a look at that, and they averaged 26 different climate models together to get a projection of what our kids or grandkids could experience at the end of the century in summers in the Philadelphia area. And as you can see, they anticipate summers will be about 10 degrees hotter and feel like summers in the southernmost tip of Texas. But it's not just heat that we have to worry about, it's also humidity. Because when heat and humidity mix, it becomes dangerous. And when we hit heat index above 105 degrees, it becomes very difficult for our bodies to sweat to cool down. And we know what those days are like. We hear on the radio or on the internet that we should not go outside during the heat of the day, keep our children in, our pets in, take care of our elderly, do not go out for recreation or for work. They're kind of lost days. And we don't have that many of them right now in the Northeast, but it is anticipated that we will have a lot more as we go closer into mid-century. But as concerning as that might be, it's much more dangerous further south, because some of our favorite cities, whether it's Tampa or Miami or my hometown of New Orleans, or even over in Austin or Phoenix, they are all projected to have many months of danger days by mid-century, and even more as they go later into the end of the century. So let's think about what those kind of brutally hot days could mean through those three lenses. What do you think will happen to jobs and economy in these markets? Well, we know that agricultural yield goes down as heat goes up. We know that human productivity goes down as heat goes up. We know that they will need to build more infrastructure to keep their population safe. And we know that infrastructure tends to degrade more quickly in high heat. So clear hits to jobs and economy. What about that second one? How will it impact personal health and security? Well, I think many of us know that higher temperatures lead to worse outcomes for lung and heart disease. We may even know that as heat goes up, crime rates go up. But what we may not know is that heat is the #1 weather killer, more than any other weather occurrence. So clear hits to our health and personal security. But what about that third one? What would scientists mean about this bad influence on our geopolitical stability? Well, as hot as it may become here in our own country, it's anticipated it will be even hotter in Central America and places further south, and that many there may find those countries much less habitable. And that will cause migration flows and refugees flows against our borders unlike anything we've ever seen. And intriguingly, scientists also anticipate that there will be migrations from our southern states north to our northern states as economies begin to fail under the pressures of climate change. So real disruption ahead. But of course, heat isn't just in our country, it's all around the world. Take a look from this graphic, which is from NASA, that projects what summertime temperatures could be during the summer at the end of the century if we continue on our current emissions path. And what we see is that highly populated areas like Northern Africa and the Middle East, and even some parts of California, could have temperatures as high as an average of 113 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. And that is the cool of the night averaged in with the heat of the day, which means the Earth never really gets to cool down, which is so deadly to so many species. And while that seems far off, scientists have reported that last year, for little tiny slivers of time, we reached periods where the heat and humidity were so hot in areas like Pakistan and India, and even on our own Gulf Coast, that a human being, if exposed to that for a long period of time, would die simply resting under a tree and doing nothing. In other words, we're hitting temperatures that humans have never experienced before, and it's anticipated that it will get worse in the near future. So let's move quickly to food. This is from the Nonpartisan World Resource Institute, and they took a look at how crop yields would be impacted by rising temperature. And as you can see from this map, if we get up to a 3 degrees Celsius increase, we really lose a lot of food production in our high population centers. In fact, our own USDA projects that in our Midwest, some of our top crops like soy and corn could go down by as much as 60% simply because of higher temperatures as we cross over the middle of the century. So when we think of all these bread baskets potentially being harmed at the same time, we could see that this could lead to higher incidence of global famine as we get further into the century. And food isn't just on land, it's also in the water. And something many of us don't realize is that when carbon dioxide mixes with ocean water, it turns into carbonic acid, and it's making our oceans more acidic. It's already 30% more acidic since the Industrial Revolution began. And that plays havoc on creatures who build their shells out of calcium. And that includes some of our favorite foods like oysters and scallops and clams, but it also includes these little creatures at the base of the marine food chain, which are really critical for a lot of fish we eat, like salmon and mackerel. And we're not just acidifying the oceans, we're also heating them up. In some cases, we're heating them up as much as 4 degrees, which is adding energy to our hurricanes and making them stronger and more deadly. And the heat is also playing real havoc with our coral reefs, leading to these heartbreaking bleaching events. Coral reefs are the nurseries for 95% of all marine sea life. So you can imagine that we are really playing Russian roulette with future generations' ability to feed themselves from the sea. And I'd like to go back to something that Dallas said at the beginning, which is that these small numbers really matter. Well, according to the last International Panel of Climate Change report, they projected that if we could keep our temperature down at the 1.5 degrees Celsius level, we could potentially save 10 to 30% of all coral reefs. But if we hit that 2-degree increase, they anticipate we will lose them all. So every smidgen of a degree is worth fighting for. Let's quickly move to heavy rainstorms. This picture could be almost anywhere, and that's because it's happening almost everywhere. And that's because warmer air holds more water vapor. For every degree Celsius it goes up, it holds up about 7% more water vapor, which means there's more to come crashing on our heads in these heavy rain events. In fact, you can see from this graphic, it's happening more across the entire United States. Let's move to sea level rise, which is also a very bedeviling ramification of climate change, because we know we have a bunch baked in. Why? Because we know that land ice, the glaciers are melting and that water is racing to the sea. And we know that we are heating up the oceans, which means that it's thermally expanding. So between the two of those, in the last century, the sea on average globally has gone up about 8 inches. Scientists predict on a best case scenario that we would have 1.5 to 3 feet by the end of the century, and worst case scenario as high as 8 feet. And again, the question isn't just how much is coming, it's how fast it will come and how much time we will have to react. And as you can see from these pictures of communities up and down our shorelines, right now at 8 inches, we are already having severe difficulties handling it. Businesses are closing, houses are unable to be sold, school buses are unable to pick up children. And this is just at 8 inches. Imagine what could be ahead. And it has a direct hit on our economy. This is from Zillow. They took a look at what sort of residential losses we would have, or property losses we would have at a 6-foot sea level rise. You can see it would be about $900 billion. And New Jersey, interestingly enough, has the second greatest exposure. But remember, it's not just residential or commercial properties that are at risk. It's also our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, even our fiber optics. So we will have a lot of hard decisions to make on what we can save and what we will have to leave to the sea. Let's move quickly to health. This is directly from the CDC. They have a very robust site with lots of things that you would anticipate being linked to climate change. But there were also some surprising ones. One for me was asthma, because asthma is triggered often by pollen levels, and pollen levels increase as CO2 levels go up. It is anticipated that many more people will be afflicted with this disease as we get closer to mid-century and move further on. In fact, that will mean many more visits to our emergency room and a big hit against our public health budgets. Another thing that is worrisome is that climate change is exacerbating the wildfire season. Yes, man's management of the forest is important and plays an important role as we look for how we're going to live with this risk in the future. But what scientists say is that it is just so dry. It's dry because summer-like conditions are extending much longer in the year, that when that spark hits, there's a much greater chance of it becoming much more deadly and much more powerful. And so I think we all need to recognize, as we are seeing these wildfires throughout our West, but also in Siberia and in the Arctic Circle, that things are changing and scientists are pointing that finger at climate change. Another thing that is happening is that we are experiencing more diseases from pests like ticks and fleas and mosquitoes because of climate change. They are extending their geographical area and they are active longer during the year. In Philadelphia, we have 14 more days where we are more likely to receive a disease from mosquitoes because there are more active mosquito days today. And that means that we're getting exposed to new diseases like Zika and dengue, but we're also going to have to get used to some old diseases like malaria, which was more or less extinguished in this country in the early 1900s. Scientists project from this colored red area that you see on this map that our Gulf Coast shores and our Atlantic communities will experience malaria again at significant numbers by 2050 due to climate change. And the CDC remarks that all of these types of stressors will lead to mass population movement and international conflict, especially in places that have weak institutions or poor governance. And that is confirmed by our own Department of Defense, who has called climate change an urgent and growing threat to our national security, contributing to increased natural disasters, refugee flows, and conflicts over basic resources such as food and water. These impacts are already occurring, and the scope, scale, and intensity of these impacts are projected to increase over time. And another thing that is increasing are our natural disasters. I think that's not a shock to anyone on this call, but it is kind of shocking to see it put down into a bar graph. This is directly from Munich Re, which is the leading reinsurance company in the world. And what they told us when they gave us this chart is that it's not that climate change causes every single line on this bar, but what it does is it loads the dice and stacks the deck. It makes it more likely that they will happen and more deadly and more expensive when they do. And all of this means that there will be clear hits to our GDP. This is a chart from BlackRock Investment Institute that projects how our local GDPs could be adversely impacted by mid-century. And you can see there are very few areas that are green where our economy is anticipated to be growing. All of the rest is stagnant or declining. And another thing that we need to talk about is the fact that climate change is driving extreme loss of biodiversity and our ecosystems. I think many of you may be birders. If so, the Audubon Society came out with a new campaign saying that 2/3 of North American birds are threatened by climate change. 2/3. And it's not just our animals, it's also our sacred spaces. This is a place in Princeton near me, a reservoir where I love to go take my dog. If I ever have grandkids, I hope to bring them there as well. There's a place nearby where I can buy a crisp apple in the fall. But scientists say that I better enjoy it now because my grandkids, when they grow up, will have a less of an opportunity to enjoy this fall splendor because a lot of these trees need the cold to flourish and they're beginning to migrate north. And this is happening all around the world where we are losing our sacred spaces. And I don't know how to put a price tag on that, but for me, it's really priceless. So I want to take a minute to think about what I just shared with you. I shared with you some projections from NASA and NOAA, groups that we normally find pretty credible and we look to keep us safe. Does that mean that their projections are 100% correct? Of course not. They're just projections, and we all know that projections are our best guesses based on what knowledge we have right now. But the question isn't whether they're 100% right. The question is, are these projections credible? Because anywhere else in our lives, when consequences were this significant, we would take action to avoid that risk if we found it credible. Scientists say we are misunderstanding this risk. We are not according it the respect it deserves. And I'm going to ask everyone to think for a second whether they have fire insurance. And probably, I see some nodding, probably almost every one of us on this call do. And it's not because we're 100% sure that our house is going to burn down, but if it does, it is catastrophic. So we shut the fire doors, we buy smart appliances, and we buy insurance. Scientists say that the chance of each and every one of us being significantly impacted by climate change is much greater than our house burning down. But again, we are not according it the right respect. Now, I know that there are some pundits who say, don't get alarmed, don't get sucked in. Some of these projections are overblown. But what I don't hear from those pundits are the scientists on the other side of the equation who say, actually, the models are underrepresenting the risk because they don't capture all the black swan events, things that are less likely to happen, but truly catastrophic if they do. Like what? Like the burning of our permafrost. We all know that when creatures die up in the Arctic, many of times they freeze before they fully decay. But now the Arctic is warming faster than any other part of the globe, and those decaying organisms are decaying en masse and putting up vast amounts of carbon dioxide and methane. And scientists are worried that it could create a feedback loop that humans could not control. So we have some saying, hey, don't worry, be happy. We have some on the other side saying, drink heavily, the Titanic is going down. And then we have the vast majority of scientists in the middle saying this is a real and significant threat, and there are smart things that we can do to lower that risk. And we are all supposed to make a bet, and that bet isn't just for ourselves, but it's for everyone else on the planet. And it's not just for this generation, but for future generations as well. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we make that bet? And what would a prudent person decide to do? So I am betting that you guys are all very, very depressed right now. And so I am going to move quickly to the next question, which is there hope? Because Sea Change resoundingly says, yes, there is hope. And that is because of 6 reasons. The first is that our economic equation has changed. The second is that other countries are stepping forward and leading. The third is that financial institutions and corporations are demanding action. The fourth is new technologies on the horizon. The fifth is the power of nature to regenerate and heal. And the sixth is that America is becoming less divided than we think. So let's start with the first one. How is the economic equation changing? Well, we now are recognizing that the cost of inaction is much higher than the cost of action. We know the old equation was climate change is going to happen to far off people in far off places. And the most important thing we can do is to keep the economy strong today so that they will be better set up for whatever comes in the future. Well, the new equation is we are paying for climate change right now as taxpayers, both to handle all those natural disasters that we just saw in the last section, but also to prepare and build the infrastructure to protect ourselves from the new normals or the new norms that nature is throwing at us. And as we are spending so much more, it has become so much less expensive to move to a lower carbon economy and lessen our risk. What do I mean by that? All I mean is that the cost of moving and powering our economy through non-carbon sources like wind and solar have gained significantly in their importance because the costs have dropped so precipitously. In fact, as you can see from this graphic, today, wind and solar are the cheapest new form of power generation that we have, much cheaper than gas, coal, or nuclear. And this is true in 3/4 of the world now and expected to be true everywhere in the next 3 or 4 years. And importantly, this is on an apples to apples unsubsidized comparison. And also importantly, battery prices have dropped 89% in the last decade, which means we have the ability to extend the use of these variable wind and solar resources. And that's really a game changer. And what that means is that for the first time, we know that we could move towards net zero using wind and solar and storage as our cornerstone, and arrive there in a way that would not cost our economy more than we are currently spending on energy. I'm going to say that again. We now have the ability to move to be net zero by 2050 without spending any more than we are currently allocating to energy. That is something that did not exist 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Again, a game changer. And it also means that we are creating new jobs because, quite honestly, a dollar invested in the new economy creates more jobs than a dollar invested in fossil fuels because fossil fuels have become so automated. As you can see from this graphic, almost 3/4 of all jobs in the power generation area now come from non-fossil fuels. And what this means is that these economic reasons are pushing states and utilities to embrace renewables at a breathtaking rate. Whether it's Georgia or Nebraska, or Iowa, these different states are moving not because of anything except that it is cheaper for their constituents. The second thing that's important is that countries are leading. There are more than 100 countries that have come out with a pledge to be carbon neutral by mid-century. And that represents about 70% of global GDP. And Europe has perhaps taken the lead. They have proclaimed they want to be the first carbon neutral continent. And the way they've mapped it out in their version of their Green Deal is important because it lays out the pathway for the rest of us. Support innovation and new technologies, roll out cleaner transportation, decarbonize the electricity sector, increase building efficiency, support international goals, and foster cooperation. And I want to pause there because I think that it is critical for us to think back on what happened over the COVID crisis and what we could do when we came together and lower barrier and made our efforts work together synergistically to get to that vaccine. And I think that's a really important template as we move forward in addressing climate change. And lastly, changing our land use practices. One of the things on that list is moving to low carbon cars like electric cars. I think you probably know that many countries have banned them in the near future and that our own GM has said they will stop building them. And the reason why this is feasible is that battery costs have come down so quickly that it's anticipated in the next 3 to 4 years, a battery car will be at cost parity to buy with a regular combustion engine. And if you think that they don't break because they're much fewer parts and that it's much cheaper upkeep and that they last a lot longer and it's cheaper to fuel, you can see on economics alone, this transition could be a lot sooner than many people recognize. And as I mentioned, key countries are stepping forward. We always think of China as being kind of the back of the class because they are the leader in emissions, making up about 30% of all global emissions. And they are supporting export of coal technology and building coal plants within their country. But at the same time, they have dominated the investment and the planning to become the leaders in the new low carbon economy. And so what we see is that they are moving to become a very credible leader within the international community. In fact, they preceded the United States in their pledge to become carbon neutral by 2060. And that inspired the heavily industrialized countries of Japan and South Korea to follow suit. And they are putting their dollars where their mouth is. As I said, they are outspending us about 2 to 1. They are also out educating us. They're creating the professionals for the future type of economy right now, which is something that we're lagging in. India too has stepped forward. Modi has said that he recognizes climate change as a direct threat to human survival, and in fact has pledged to put in more renewable energy than any other country by 2022, or in 2022. And importantly, it's not just China and India, it's all of the developing world that are stepping forward and spending more than the developed world. And this is critical because what we need them to do is leapfrog over the old technologies directly to the new, just like they did over poles and wires with telecommunication. Next reason we're so excited is because financial institutions are beginning to lead. The US Chamber of Commerce, which historically has been a very staunch climate denier, reversed its position a year ago and has come out and said that climate inaction is not an option. We need strong policies at the federal level to get us there. The Federal Reserve last year echoed those sentiments, saying that climate change was a direct threat to our economic stability. And it's not just those institutions, it's also Larry Fink, who is the CEO of the largest investment firm in the world. He has said that climate change has become a defining factor in companies' long-term prospects and is causing a fundamental reshaping of business. And even more importantly, they have said they are going to become activists and push other companies who are not acting to do so. And corporations are answering the call. They are moving to lessen their own emissions, and they are beginning to lobby Congress for the very first time for policies at the federal level. Another thing that is so encouraging is that we have all sorts of new technologies on the horizon. Some of it will help us increase our efficiencies, just like the LED light did. I think we all remember the hoopla over the LED light and the pushback. Well, today, incandescent lights make up 6% of the total light market. And the Department of Energy projects by 2035, consumers will have saved almost $900 billion on energy costs simply by moving to more efficient lighting. Low-hanging fruit, we save money while we save emissions. The other thing we need to recognize is that we need to modernize and decarbonize our grid. Our grid is antiquated. It is like the old road system before we built the highways. We need to bring it up to snuff. And to do so, it will help us protect it against hackers, and it will help us protect it against natural disasters. But it will also enable us to integrate many more clean energy sources, and storage will help us decarbonize our electricity system. And we have a part to play, because if we have an electric car or we have one of these cute little personal batteries on our wall, in the future, a utility could borrow 1% of our energy when there was a peak demand time. And that would mean they would not have to turn on a fossil fuel plant. So this nimbleness, these new technologies could really help us going forward. And once we have a clean grid, we have to electrify everything: buses, garbage trucks, even short distance airplanes, and the appliances in our homes, whether it's our heating systems or our stoves. But in the interim, we have to find a way to use carbon safely. And some of the areas that look promising are carbon capture and sequestration. This is a plant up in Iceland that takes carbon gas, pumps it underground where it turns back into rock. And this one actually sucks carbon out of the air and then uses it for beneficial things like putting extra carbon into a greenhouse or putting fizz into a Coca-Cola's at the nearby Coca-Cola plant. And there's a lot of promise about getting carbon out of the air. They are turning it into all sorts of useful things like fuels, things like fish food, and perhaps my favorite are things like vodka. Yes, they are making vodka from carbon emissions. Another area that's really intriguing is the fact that they're coming up with newer, safer, smaller nuclear design. And this is important because many people feel that nuclear has a role to play as we begin to build out our wind and solar to provide that backup when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. These new plants are much safer. Many of them use molten salt instead of water. They put out much less They turn themselves off when on the laws of physics and don't need intervention. We can start dancing there. And so it has some real promise ahead. Another one that I am so excited about is fusion. This is the holy grail of energy. It is clean, it is abundant, it is safe, but it has always been out of reach. But just this past month, the National Academies of Sciences has said that we are at a point where we can build our first pilot plant. And that is because we've made such progress on lasers and magnets and AIs and other areas. And so this really holds promise as we get into mid-century. Another darling of the green set is green hydrogen, which is made using clean energy and water and is very clean, and it could power airplanes and shipping and also some manufacturing. Another thing that's kind of whimsical are solar roads. This is a road outside a village in France that provides energy to that village. And in China, which I told you wants to be the singular leader in this arena, they've done the French one better. They've actually put little electrodes in their solar roads so that an electric car can self-charge as it drives over. So the next reason we're so excited about the future and we are so hopeful is because nature holds such a big part of the answer. We know that if we change our land use practices, move to more regenerative practices, regenerative agriculture, reforestation, afforestation, taking care of our wetlands and our peatlands, we could absorb almost 30% of the excess carbon in the air. And lastly, we are hopeful because we are becoming much less divided on this issue. If you ask Americans if they believe in global warming, 72% say yes. If you ask them if they support regulating CO2, 75% say yes. And if you ask them if they support research into renewable energy, 86% of Americans say a resounding yes. And what this means is there's more room now for both parties to come together. And there is much more bipartisan activity at the federal level. We have seen many very important proposals enter into committee, and we are also seeing much more collaboration. And part of that is because Republicans have recognized that Americans are beginning to truly care about this issue and their constituents are raising their voices, and that younger voters care passionately. And kind of news to me, but as of this past year, millennials make up a bigger voting bloc than baby boomers, so that we will see a shift to their concerns being considered at the Washington level. So a lot of exciting things happening there. But we are in a race, and right now our current path still brings us into dangerous territory. If you follow that red line, we are projected to get close to 6 to 10 degrees hotter by the end of the century if we continue on our current emissions path. And I will say that because coal plants are closing so rapidly, I think this number is a little better than that, but it's still somewhere between 4.7 and 7.5 degrees hotter. And if you think that at 7 degrees colder, we were in an ice age, we don't want to go to 7 degrees hotter. And to avoid that, we really, really need to pull together. So I'm sure you're asking, what can we do? The first thing we need to do is really care and think about this issue every single day. And recognize that when we meet the young children that are coming into our classrooms and into our lives, that they're going to be on this planet when nature is playing by very different rules, and they are going to grow up and they're going to look us in the eye and they're going to ask us, what did you do? And I think we all recognize that we have that moral obligation to leave the world as good as we found it. The second thing we need to do is recognize that we are all in this together. We sink or swim together. Our actions will either save or hurt others and vice versa. We cannot do this alone. We also need to recognize that new technologies hold the answer. We need to pivot our support, our dollars, and our energies to the new ways of doing things because they will protect us. And we have to recognize that even though we may be taking action to protect our kids and grandkids, those actions of stopping to burn the vast amount of greenhouse gases that we currently are from fossil fuels will help our lives directly today by lessening the air, water, and land pollution that we are exposed to. We also have to recognize it is our responsibility to raise our voices with our policy leaders. If they get 100 phone calls, it is a tsunami and they listen. So we need to let them know we care. And we need to educate ourselves and take personal action. So you might ask, what kind of actions will make the greatest impact? Well, as this chart says, the average American household puts out about 49 tons of carbon dioxide, quite a lot of it in our travel and in running our homes. That many of us who travel more or have bigger homes have a bigger footprint. For an individual person in the United States, it averages about 16.5 tons, and compare that to the worldwide average of 4 tons. So if each of us puts out an average of 16.5 tons, how could we ameliorate that? Well, by taking personal actions. As this chart shows, one of the best things we could do is buy an electric car, or at least a more fuel efficient one. Another way that we can do that's an easy thing is ease up on how fast we drive and how hard we hit the gas. And lastly, consider taking one less of those major flying trips. In our homes, we need to find ways to integrate clean energy. If you can't add solar to your roof, look to buy into a community solar option or to buy clean energy through your utility. You can save quite a lot of emissions that way. Again, look to replace those incandescent lights with LEDs and save money, and also consider turning down your thermostats to more moderate temperatures. We can also do a lot in the area of diet and conservation and planting. If we just ate 3 less servings of beef, we could save over a full ton of carbon. And if we reduced our trash, and something simple as planting trees, all of these help. So we need to remember, just like every smidgen of a degree counts, every individual action adds up. So in closing, I'd like to say we are the first generation to understand the risks of climate change. We are the first ones to begin to feel the brunt of it on our shoulders and to recognize the devastation we are leaving for our kids and our grandkids. And we are the first generation to have the tools to do something about it. And the question for all of us on this call, and really all of us on this planet, is what will we choose to do? Thank you, and I really look forward to your questions. And I think we have a poll. Andrea, do you want to put the poll up, or should I move to the QR first?
Sure. Actually, let's, okay, there we go. So compared to what I knew when I came into this presentation, I learned 1, nothing much new. I kind of already knew this information. 2, a little more. 3, quite a bit more. And 4, a lot more. This changed my perspective on it. And while our participants are voting, there were several questions, which we'll take a real quick run at. Maybe the most pertinent one is this last one where you were kind of ending, Kathleen, where Alexander is asking, who is the we on the impact of the our actions slide. So just trying to clarify, I believe he just dropped this into the chat, so maybe the previous slide.
The personal action slide was an average US household and average US individual. And so what we were trying to show is what kind of actions would lessen our output most significantly and kind of give you a range of actions. So clearly changing your car and changing the electricity in your home were very important. I should say in New Jersey, transportation is critical in this area. But I think that people also don't realize just how important our output from our homes are. The other thing I would mention is that we just took an average there. There are tools on the internet where you can go in and answer questions that will actually calculate your own household and own personal footprint. And I think that is really eye-opening for people, just to see how much carbon they are individually responsible for. Did that answer his question? Because I'm happy to.
I think so. He just added to the chat, thanks for the clarification. So I think we're good. So one of the earliest questions was, and I think we got to answer it, but I'll leave it to the two of you to decide if you want to add anything more to it. Chantal had asked, what exactly is the fingerprint found on the carbon dioxide molecules that are produced by human activities? And Alexander actually weighed in and said that it's related to the C13 and C12 ratios of the different isotopes of carbon in the CO2 molecules. And that's how we're able to kind of point, directly point to that this is caused by human activity. Anything else to add to that explanation or answer?
No, but does he want to be a sea change speaker?
Maybe looking back at what he teaches, he might be interested. I don't know, Alexander, I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, he nailed it. I mean, I think it's important that natural sources of carbon have that different isotope than these antiquated sources that have been in the ground for so long. And that's part of why the ratios are different. But yes, thank you, Alexander.
Oh, sure. It's that classic one when someone's like, well, what about the volcanoes? And it's a really great piece of information to have on hand. And there's like I was saying in there, we have about 40 years of data on it. So it doesn't go as far back as the CO2. But if somebody's looking for that one thing that really says humans did this, I always bring that up.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. And I see that we still have the poll up. So Renee, if you want to go ahead and close that. Thank you so much. Okay. So it seems like we're kind of in the middle there. That's great. If you want to go ahead and close that. One of the comments that I want to just elevate, and Kathleen and Dallas, just let you know I'm pulling a audible here right now, but we had planned to go into breakout rooms, but I think in interest of time, maybe we'll just stick with some questions, and we'll because we only have about 15 minutes left, and I know everyone's time is very valuable. We'll keep, I see.
Kathleen, can you stop sharing your screen, and then maybe we could just have a discussion? People could share like their responses to the presentation. And
I would, I just put my QR code up, and some reason I haven't been able to.
Of course.
That's the only request.
Yep. So Kathleen is going to show a QR code right now that is related to Sea Change Conversations. Go ahead, Kathleen, if you want. Their survey. So if you want to take a minute, Dallas, maybe did we have a link as well for this, or will it be on the next slide?
The QR will enable somebody to point their phone at it and use their camera to focus on it, and then that'll bring up a link. And you don't have to fill in the survey now, but you just click the link when it comes up, then you'll have it for later. And we greatly appreciate it. It's part of our continuous improvement. Thank you.
So guys, for some reason, it's not allowing me to advance my slides. So we'll have to send the QR.
You can send a link directly out later. Perhaps Andrea, you could do that.
We'd be happy to. Yeah, we would be happy to do that. So, so then what we'll do if, let's see, Kathleen, if you want to go ahead and.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Oh, there we go. I think I can overpower you.
Oh.
All right. So.
Okay.
What we were going to do is jumping to breakout rooms, but I know we don't really have time for that. But the three questions that we were going to discuss in the breakout rooms were what was helpful from his presentation for you as educators. And as I'm sure you all are aware, New Jersey recently integrated climate change into all New Jersey student learning standards across grade levels, across content areas. So hopefully some of this information was helpful to you. Secondly, what questions remain for you? And then what are your next steps towards teaching climate change? So if you want to take a minute and just think about those three questions, I think maybe where we'll start is if you want to, let's see, we'll do a two-pronged approach here. We have a little less than 15 minutes left. If you have something that you feel that was really helpful to you from this presentation, you can type it into the chat. And if you think you have a question that remains for you, that's maybe what we will spend our first few minutes discussing. So I'll give everybody a second or two to think. I'm going to take down my shared screen.
Andrea, there are still a couple questions in the chat.
Right. Sure, I was trying to balance, all right, while you're thinking of a question that remains to you, I'll pose a question to Dallas and Kathleen. Tracy asks, has it been disputed the human activity is a cause of climate change, and are most people on board now? I think maybe you all talked about it a little bit, but if you want to add anything to it.
Dallas, do you want to take that, or do you want me to?
Go ahead.
So yes, and quite honestly, that was something that was played up a lot. And I think it is because for many people, it is inconceivable that humans could have the power to literally change the way nature works on such a grand scale. And I have to say, you know, we've presented this, as Dallas said, all around the country. And for many people, there's been a religious component of that they feel that could not be happening. And so I would say that is fading more, but we have those questions in that order for a reason. The first level of people say, hey, it's totally not even happening. And then that has really dropped to a very small number because people are seeing it in the world around them. The second tier are people say, well, maybe it's happening, but it's not humankind. And that group is shrinking as well, but it's been a pretty powerful constituent over the last little bit. I'm sure you remember the senator with the snowball. That really played to a lot of people's perception. So I would say it's shrinking, but yes, there are still people who believe that.
I would add only that there's at least $100 million, maybe 150 million. I've seen different estimates of funding for organizations whose role is specifically to put out sort of anti-climate change, denial sort of messages. And this has been going on for many years. The organizations that are doing it are known. So it's a tough slog to overcome that.
I forgot I did turn it up.
All right, so then I think we'll do two quick science-related questions, and then we'll turn back to how can we use some more of this information. So one of the other questions earlier was from Julia when you all were talking about, is there hope on the renewable energy use versus fossil fuel usage? She was posing the question about what about the experts who say that without nuclear, we simply can't meet energy needs on wind and solar alone. So if one of you want to take a quick stab at that.
Sure. So I would refer her to the new report out of Princeton, which shows 5 different pathways that we could get to net zero by 2050. And again, they were the ones who noted that we could do it without spending any more of our GDP allocation for energy. And in all of them, wind and solar play a cornerstone role, but only in one of them are they the primary and only role. Others have nuclear or biofuels or carbon capture. So there are lots of different pathways that we can get to net zero. What Princeton recommended, which seemed very smart to me, is that we definitely continue to invest in the sure things, which are wind and solar and batteries, right? Because they give us a big chunk of it. And at the same time, we continue to find what the new technologies are going to be that are going to be most feasible to get us the rest of the way.
Great, thank you. And so there was a request if Dallas or Kathleen, you have the link to that report. Someone was interested in reviewing that a little bit more carefully, but maybe we can send it out with some of our follow-up materials. But in the meantime, would one of you like to take a bat at the question from Thomas, is the current weather situation in Texas a result of climate change?
Ooh, can I take that, Dallas?
You take that. I'll see if I can find this link and put it in the chat.
Okay.
Thank you both.
So there is a new science that is gaining a lot of attention called the science of attribution. And that enables scientists to go back and statistically judge how a specific event or disaster was made more likely or more deadly by climate change. I have not seen that data yet on Texas. So I don't know that we have conclusive evidence that says this is. We've often had cold in Texas. This does seem like an aberration. But what we do know is things like that are made more likely by climate change. And it is forecast that more things like that will happen. Why cold instead of hot? Well, because there is some really interesting science going on that they're investing more fully about how the jet stream kind of corrals that cold air up. And when there's a lot of energy in the system, it can kind of get punched through and that cold air can leak down. So, you know, it's interesting, and I'm sure Alexander may have a better answer than I do.
There we go. Yeah, I see him raising his hand. Go ahead, Alexander, if you want to throw in there. Sure.
That was exactly where I was going to go. One of the ways that I read it was a stronger jet stream is the result of a really cold Arctic area and a warmer temperate zone. So as the Arctic area is warming faster than the temperate area, the strength of the jet stream is reducing. So it's no longer as strong and as circular as it typically is in terms of corralling that cold air up. So we're going to see more fluctuations in the jet stream, and a really deep dip like this into Texas is, you know, is consistent with our understanding of a faster warming Arctic area. But like you said, with the science of attribution, it's hard to, you know, picking one event is really difficult to attribute to climate change.
But they're getting better at it.
They're getting better at it, yes.
Okay, and can I just tell you that I read today that our ocean circulation is under a same sort of scenario as that jet stream. So it's not just happening in the air, it's also happening in the oceans.
Yeah.
I put the link in the chat to an article that was published approximately the same day the study was published. That should get you into the Princeton websites. It's not actually the link to the study, but it's going to get you close. And I think from there, you'll be able to get into the details.
Yeah, and I see Heather dropped in Heather McCall dropped from Sustainable Jersey for Schools dropped in a link as well. So between those two, I'd imagine you'd be able to get there, everyone. All right, so my 3 questions for you all were, what was helpful from the presentation? And thanks so much for throwing some comments there into the chat. What questions remain? Hopefully we've kind of started to tease out some of those. And where I really would love to spend our final 5 minutes together are, what are your next steps towards teaching climate change in your classroom? And kind of the corollary to that is, what help do you need? Like, that's where my position always is wondering, as a teacher educator, and especially around climate change professional development. If you want to take a minute, we can call on people if you want to raise your hands to be thinking about what are your next steps towards bringing climate change into your classroom, or if you have very specific ideas about things that you need, if you want to drop them in the chat, that would be awesome too. But I will go ahead and pull up to see if anybody's raising your hand. Please feel free. Because we are in Zoom meeting, we can unmute, or you can unmute yourself, and we can kind of contribute together and have a little conversation for our final moments together. I see, or actually, I'll just be quiet for a moment, let you all think. Alexander, I'll come to you in just one moment. I know sometimes, even as a former middle school teacher, I know we all need a little process time ourselves sometimes, so. All right, I see Danielle has added to the chat, the next step is finding a way to make the information accessible to younger students. Yeah, absolutely. And we will be able to share some follow-up resources to kind of help with that. Alexander, go ahead. You want to share your thoughts?
Yes. All right. Let me put my hand down. That's distracting for everybody. Okay. So I feel okay on science, and you know that's due to my background. How do I get students to care about policy? Like, I can stand up and teach this and do this. How do I get them optimistic about that? Because like we said, 99.x% of scientists agree on climate change and the science behind it. But yeah, how do I teach policy when you have scientists and politicians and economists and everybody just putting so many different solutions forward? How do you handle that? With sea change, that is.
So, I mean, I'm not an educator, and that sort, I mean, we are sharing with other citizens, but I guess what I was thinking is that right now there are so many important policy things under consideration, and bipartisan, from the Trillion Trees to the Ocean Act to using soils and land. And the fact that they are bipartisan, I think makes them safe spaces. And I think it would be really intriguing to look at the different ones that are currently in committee and see which ones that your students think would be the most helpful going forward. right? Like they could kind of analyze the different benefits and which ones then are perhaps the easiest to get through the system, because like there's the ones that help the farmers because it pays the farmer to sequester. And so it kind of turns farmers from being anti-climate to pro-climate. So that's an added benefit. So I think you could tease that out by, again, starting with bipartisan proposals, because that kind of diffuses any kind of political pushback, and analyze them on the merits, and maybe do a race where you're betting like horses, which one's going to make it over the finish line, and why.
I like that, Kathleen. And you're at the Hunt School, so is that mainly high school students, Alexander?
Yes.
Okay. I was thinking that for middle school students, I know there's some teachers here. I am not an educator, but I do remember really well coming home and having arguments with my parents after learning something exciting in 6th or 7th grade. And I remember half the battle for me, I think, makes me think it's just enough to get the kids to go home and have that discussion at the dinner table.
So I also think sharing examples of what's going on. I mean, climate change is really one of the areas where students and young people have been speaking out for the last couple of years. And in New Jersey, there's this, in many places, but in New Jersey, the Sunrise movement, which is made up of high school and college students, are very active. There's a student climate change group out there. I think it's out of Rowan. There's lots of youth groups that are forming around this issue. And this session is actually part of this pilot climate summit session that Andrea talked at the beginning. And the sessions that we're doing as part of that are just as much about civic engagement as they are in terms of what climate change is, because we want the students to realize what their power is in this, because especially things at the local level where it's very hard for politicians to say no to kids that are coming like to the Board of Ed or meeting or to the municipal council meeting. So maybe trying to give some assignments to your students to kind of dabble in that area to realize they do have agency. And especially, with their social media savvy, like using that as a platform to advance issues is a good thing to get them engaged in.
Yeah, the one thing that I was just going to tag onto that, and then I see, Pam, you want to add something as well, but I also want to be respectful of everyone's time, that we are closing in at 5, that it doesn't have to be like, while national policy is very, very important to be moving forward on climate change, it doesn't have to be. That there are local issues, local ordinances, local impacts that can be had as well, that students can see the more tangible connections to. And I will come to you, Pam, in just one moment, but I just want to remind everyone that we will be able to hopefully we'll collect some of these other questions and some of your feedback. As you close out of the Zoom, you should be directed to a survey, and we will be sending the Sea Change Conversations QR code survey as well that we would love your feedback on. I'll be sending that out, or Renee will be sending it out via email in just a little while, and we encourage your participation. And thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to drop the link to our broader event over the next 4 weeks for those of you who are interested in participating, and then I'm going to turn it to Pam. But if you need to leave, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much for joining us. But Pam, your comment.
Just one quick word. I agree with Alexander and Dallas's idea of arguing with his parents. We do need to reach out to the adult community, and if the green teams and the environmental commissions in every town just are dying to work with kids and would love to have young people in their loop. And I know the ECHO group at the high school is doing a week-long science fairy kind of thing, but virtually. And so we're promoting it all throughout the town as well. So I think this is the place where really we let down the barriers between school politics and town politics and whatever, and get people all engaged together. And that's where Sustainable Jersey has been so great, but we need to really work all of this together and come up with stuff like planting trees or cleaning your rivers or testing your water, whatever the kids can do at whatever level, there's a group in town that I'm sure would support the teachers and help them make it all happen.
Great, thank you. Let's see, so the PD's posted for the future, it's the same information as today. Oh no, it'll be different information. So coming up on, I have to double check what the schedule is. We have a PD around exploring the new climate infusion into the New Jersey student learning standards for middle school, a separate PD aimed at high school, and then the fourth PD that is open to all New Jersey teachers is around ideas for integrating climate change into your classroom, from a science perspective, from a social studies civic perspective, from a sustainability perspective. And then for those of you who are in the Atlantic City Electric service area, we have an additional PD that is focused around the climate contest, which is being sponsored as a part of this program, around being an ally for youth-driven action, and not always, I know we're teachers and I know we're very driven folks and we like to lead the charge, but how can we best support our students to lead the charge around climate action? And so all of these recordings, though, for both these professional developments and all the student sessions that are listed at the bit.ly that I posted, I believe, will be recorded and posted on the Sustainable Jersey for Schools website. So they'll be available for everyone as well. I see there's still a few people hanging around. If you would like to unmute and ask a question, please feel free. But again, we are officially, done, but I would love anyone else who's hanging around to ask a question. Please feel free to unmute and we can help to address it.
Well, could I ask a quick?
Yeah, sure.
One of the things that, as Dallas noted and Andrea noted, that we are all volunteers. We are doing it simply because we want to get this message out and we want to get people to come together around the issue and discuss it in a way that will be safe enough to bring people who may not believe yet into it and give a safe space for this information to kind of percolate. And that means that we are interested in churches and other schools or other sorts of associations. So if you think of another association where this message would be pertinent, please reach out to us because, as I said, we're volunteers and we're doing our best and we could sure use some help. So thank you.
I just have a quick question. I registered for the fourth one that you mentioned.
The Climate Ally?
Yeah, across the classes.
Oh, yeah.
So is that something that like they'll address all levels of school, or is that going to be mostly geared towards middle school, high school?
Our original plan was for middle school and high school. We have just recently opened up the PD to across the state. So I need to chat with our presenters to see if they're going to feel comfortable speaking to all levels. This is Danielle asking?
Yeah, I teach fourth grade, yeah.
Yeah, if you wanna, I'm gonna drop my email in the chat. If you wanna send me an email and then I can follow up with you directly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No, there's my email. If you just wanna be like, hey, it's me, just so I can find you. And I will let you know. But they are experienced across the K-12 spectrum, so I wouldn't be surprised if they say yes. But I don't want to put words in their mouth, so I will follow up with them and let you know.
All right, great. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
So somebody just put in the chat, Drury, about making this presentation to school boards and district leaders. We will think about that because Sustainable Jersey does presentations every year at the school boards conference. So we could probably incorporate this into one of our sessions. So we'll think.
Yeah, that was me who brought that up. I think one of the frustrations that I have as a teacher is that I don't, it seems to be very top down now. Unless teachers are motivated and doing it on their own, we're not getting a ton of support from our leadership in making this a priority. But I think that if they sit through presentations like this, then they will have buy-in to it. I'm certainly going to suggest this if you can give me, I'm not sure which one of you to contact. I want to pass along my experience at this to my superintendent and the district coordinator for the sciences, and just say that I found it valuable. I think you would too.
So I think you can email Andrea, or you can email the number. I don't know, how did you come to register? Did you get the email from Sustainable Jersey?
I got it from Sustainable Jersey.
Yeah, there's an email in there. There's an email address in there. You could just email schools@sustainablejersey.com, and it'll get to the right person.
Okay, to ask about getting this presentation to our board.
We'll forward it to Kathleen and Dallas.
Okay, great, thanks.
I should just note, we did present to the superintendent of West Caldwell, and he had the principals come in, and it went really well.
Yeah.
So, and we have a nice testimonial from him. So that would be something we would be very, very interested in.
And I can say their interest may pick up because obviously the Murphy administration and Tammy Murphy is really big into this topic, and it's because of her efforts that she's funding this climate challenge pilot project, which we hope to roll out statewide next year. And DOE has it as kind of one of their top agendas. So Sustainable Jersey has been talking to them about kind of what they're doing in this area and what professional development opportunities and things like that. So, and the School Boards Association is involved in those conversations too. So I think there'll be more attention on it in the future too.
Yeah, especially with the rollout of the 2020 updates to the New Jersey Student Learning Standards too, of putting climate change literally in all grade levels and all content areas. I know the math and the ELA are a little late to come out, but that's the claim. And so if that's the claim at the DOE level, I think superintendents, principals, administrators are going to have to start paying attention a bit more to this.
Yeah, we needed to I've seen this before, 25 years in, and I just want to see that trickle down to the teacher level.
Absolutely. Agreed.
What district are you from?
Oh, I'm in Montclair.
Oh, okay.
Great. Well, thank you. If anybody else is hanging around to ask a question, please feel free to unmute and we can help try to address it. Okay. Well, if not, thank you very much. And thank you to my presenters. Great job, everyone.
Thank you very much.
If the presenters could just hold on for a minute, I have a couple of follow-up questions.